Okay, welcome to this first reading, well, second reading. Last week was kind of introductory of Following the Call, living the Sermon on the Mount together. Very excited to start this out together, and thanks to all the people who commented on our introductory video. So though in this video we're talking about part one, kingdom character, and chapter one, master teacher. So this section is focused on the words from Matthew 5:1. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. So in this section, we're hearing from E. Stanley Jones, who's an American Methodist minister and a missionary to India, and from Henry Nouwen, who's a member of the L'Arche communities.
So some familiar authors.
Yeah, familiar authors. And right away we start with this question, which I think is probably the question many people have reading the Sermon on the Mount. Is it something that we can actually do? Is it possible for human beings to live out this demanding teaching? And Stanley E. Jones says right from the outset, the Sermon on the Mount is practicable, for the man who first spoke these words practiced them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what this chapter points out, is that you can't separate Christ from his teachings. And although, sometimes they are powerful and cutting words and also just convicting to who we are as humans, if you do follow them, it brings the tranquility and the peace of God into your life. And so Jesus' whole life, his life story and his teachings are a progression that show us how we can get to the kingdom. Also his willingness to suffer at the end. So
yeah, he actually is the true embodiment of the Beatitudes, of all of these teachings, the poverty, the meekness, the gentleness of heart. And that right away is pretty remarkable. I mean, how many teachers, how many preachers actually embody what they talk about? And I think that's really the true power of these words, is that they are embodied in a life. I think the other thing that's really important for us is, because of the familiarity of the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes in particular, but like also these many striking passages, images of hands being cut off, and because of this familiarity, we can lose the shock value of what he's talking about, what Jesus is teaching. And it says about the first listeners, they were astonished at his teaching. And, it remains astonishing to this day. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, you cannot read the gospel in a vacuum. You have to take the words literally, but also just like you have to internalize them and then apply them to situations. And I would say in community, from my experience in church community, that is very fresh and sometimes shocking. I'm just reflecting on church services or times of gathering that we've had where there has been discomfort or conflict, and how just like reading Christ's words can bring clarity into a situation where there is strife or disagreement, and how that usually brings resolution. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it really is the case. Stanley Jones here says, we mistake the Sermon on the Mount entirely if we look on it as the chart of the Christian's duty in a legalistic framework. Rather, it is the charter of the Christian's liberty. That, to me, seems really crucial. As Doreen mentioned, in church community life, but in anyone's life, situations come along which are difficult. And how do we face them? And there is a legalistic way to approach problems, but there's also this liberating generosity and willingness to let go that Jesus talks about here, and willingness to do more and to see others as greater than oneself, that can really change a situation in a remarkable way.
Right, and along with that, it kind of makes me think about how you can't really read the Sermon on the Mount with an agenda. I mean, it's a lot of Christ's teachings you could pick apart, but actually you have to take them as a whole. You can't just weaponize one phrase or a verse. Like, I don't think that was the intention. So that's also a constant challenge, is to just have an open heart when you approach the gospel.
And apply it, first of all, to yourself.
Yes.
Not apply it to other people.
Yeah, that's where I was going with it.
Yeah. Charles Moore, who was the editor of this book, actually has an interesting study guide, which we've looked at from time to time. But one of the questions he asks, which I think maybe is a good question just to end on, and be great to hear what people's thoughts are in the comments. Now I'm struggling to find it, but...
Page 337.
Page 337.
The back, yeah.
Do you see Jesus' teachings, by and large, as good news or hard commands? Why?
Are you going to answer that?
Well, I'll try. I mean, I think both, in a way. They are good news, but they're going to be hard for us to do, because they're going to require us to become empty of ourselves.
Yeah. And it's interesting because yesterday I wasn't having such a great day, and a friend just reached out and reminded me, like, hey, not every day is going to be awesome and amazing. And I think that sometimes, it kind of also reflects how we will go up and down. There's like valleys, there's mountaintops. So Jesus' teachings are kind of like a similar guide through all that. Mm-hmm. That's the path. So, yeah, sometimes it is really difficult, but sometimes it's also just ecstatic and really joyful.
Yeah. Well, very interested in people's thoughts on this introductory, or this first chapter, and we'll look forward to next week when we go on to chapter 2, Good News. See you then.